60, the defense secretary mistakenly sends military strike plans to a reporter and now is attacking the reporter. Also, a judge calls the deportations of alleged gang members to El Salvador unprecedented and says that Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemies Act. We'll tell you what the Department of Justice said to that. And later, why Second Lady Usha Vance and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz are going to Greenland and why the Prime Minister is calling the trip highly aggressive. We begin tonight with breaking news involving a stunning breach of national security. And it involves many of the top officials in the Trump administration dealing with their nation's top secrets. We're talking about Vice President J.D. Vance, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and the White House's Stephen Miller. They were discussing highly classified U.S. war plans for an attack that actually took place on Signal, a commercially available encrypted app that isn't authorized for discussing government secrets. What's even more incredible is they mistakenly included another person in the chat, a journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine. And this wasn't just a hypothetical plan for a military operation. It was a group chat discussing and planning strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen, which started 9 days ago and is still an ongoing operation. So Goldberg revealed today he knew about the attack in advance, writing, "The reason I knew this is that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, had texted me the war plan at 11:44 a.m. The plan included precise information about weapons, packages, and targets and timing." Now, Goldberg went on to explain that 4 days before the attack, on March 11th, he received a connection request on Signal from someone claiming to be Mike Waltz, President Trump's national security advisor. Now, Goldberg wasn't sure it was the real Mike Waltz. In fact, he was pretty sure it wasn't, but he accepted the invitation in the hopes that it might be. 2 days later, inexplicably, he was added to a chat group called Houthi PC Small Group. PC stood for Principals, with all the people I named already. The topic of discussion was a potential strike against the Houthi terror group in Yemen. Goldberg writes that at this point he doubted it was real. He said, "I could not believe that the national security leadership of the United States would communicate on Signal about imminent war plans. I also could not believe that the national security advisor to the president would be so reckless as to include the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic in such discussions with senior U.S. officials, up to and including the vice president." But that is apparently what happened. And according to Goldberg, a debate ensued amongst the participants on the timing of the operation and if it should move forward at all. I'm going to show you what The Atlantic identified as actual screen grabs of a conversation between Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Vance wrote, at Pete Hegseth, "If you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing Europe out again." Hegseth responds in part, "I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic." He went on to say, "I feel like now is as good a time as any given POTUS directive to reopen shipping lanes. I think we should go, but POTUS still retains 24 hours of decision space." The next morning, Hegseth gave a team update with what Goldberg says were operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and attack sequencing. Goldberg didn't reveal those details out of concern for U.S. national security. The Trump administration has acknowledged the messages Goldberg saw appear to be authentic, and while they say they were reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain, they also said, and I quote, "The ongoing success of the Houthi operation demonstrates that there were no threats to troop or national security." Now, keep it honest, we don't know the extent of potential national security damage here. Pentagon regulations specifically state messaging apps like Signal are not authorized to transmit non-public information, and state-backed hackers have tried to access the Signal chats of officials. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth weighed in the last hour. He disparaged the reporter, Jeffrey Goldberg, and then went on to say this.
Why were those details shared on Signal, and how did you learn that a journalist was privy to the targets, the types of weapons used?
I've heard I was characterized. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Nobody was texting war plans, he said. Again, that's after Trump's National Security Council released a statement that said, quote, "This appears to be an authentic message chain." It's unclear what, if anything, the Trump administration is planning to do from here. Former DOJ official CNN spoke to said that normally the FBI would initiate an investigation, but some of the same officials that might request that kind of an investigation were actually some of the same people on that Signal chat. For more on all this, Galen Collins joins me. She's going to talk to Jeffrey Goldberg at the top of the hour on The Source. No surprise, Pete Hegseth is disparaging Jeffrey Goldberg. What else is he going to do? He, by the way, an excellent reporter. He went out of his way not to reveal any of what he could have because he was concerned about operational security. Behind the scenes of the White House, are they saying this is no big deal, or are they taking this seriously?
Well, it's also hard to say that he did not publish, or that they weren't texting war plans, as the secretary asserted there, because in his story, Jeffrey Goldberg says he is not quoting the message, the particular one that Hegseth posted, because he said it could essentially, if it was read by an adversary of the United States, could put U.S. service members at risk. And Jeffrey Goldberg says it contained operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen that included information about targets, weapons, and attack sequencing. I think it's pretty hard to argue that that does not account to war plans here about these strikes and exactly what that is going to look like. And as for the authenticity of this, that's not even really in dispute. No one in the White House, at least not to me today, was arguing that this isn't real, or that they had doubts about it, or that it was manipulated. Instead, a spokesperson for the National Security Council, for Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, said that it appeared to be authentic, and that they were investigating how an inadvertent number was added to this, Jeffrey Goldberg's number, during this message thread. And so the idea that it wasn't real is not even really something that's been in doubt from what we've been hearing at the White House today. Instead, there was a lot of shock. Yes, some defensiveness from people downplaying it, saying it wasn't that big of a deal. But I heard from a lot of people today, Anderson, who said they really couldn't believe this. Not only just that this was happening over Signal, that all of this discussion was taking place, but also Jeffrey Goldberg in particular. He's someone that Trump has a lot of disdain for. He has had that ever since past reporting that he has done on the President of the United States. And so it was the kind of that moment that I heard from a lot of officials saying they couldn't believe that a reporter was added inadvertently to a group text this sensitive about what they were going to do in Yemen. But they also especially could not believe that it was Jeffrey Goldberg who was added to that group text.
Well, let me ask you, President Trump, when he was asked about this today, and it was kind of later in the day, said, I haven't heard anything about it. He said he didn't know anything about it, which is something we've heard him say about stuff in the past that he hasn't necessarily wanted to talk to. What would be the process? Do you think it's likely he had heard about it? Or wouldn't somebody have informed the president about this?
It would be pretty striking if he had not been briefed on it. I will say he was in that cabinet meeting with Elon Musk, and then went to this meeting where with the governor of Louisiana, top Hyundai officials at the White House, as this was all breaking this morning. But obviously Jeffrey Goldberg reached out to these officials. But when you listen to the president's response there, he seemed to know to a degree what the reporters were asking about, because as soon as they commented that it was about the strikes on the Houthis, he talked about how successful those strikes were when they were launched. And obviously that is something that Jeffrey Goldberg talks about, was confirmed in the back and forth in these messages. They were celebrating with top administration officials like Steve Witkoff, the envoy to the Middle East, and Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, was also in this group chat of 18 people. I will say, the question that I've heard from people who were so shocked by this tonight is whether or not it will result in someone's firing. At least two people speculated to me that they believed that it would end up in the dismissal of one of their colleagues. The White House said tonight that the president still has confidence in his national security team. They specifically named Mike Waltz, not Secretary Rubio or Secretary Hegseth or anyone else. But obviously it's something to keep an eye on, because the president's perception of something is often shaped by the coverage of it, Anderson.
Yeah. Caitlin Collins, thanks very much. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is calling for a bipartisan investigation to how this happened. I spoke to combat veteran and Democratic Senator Mark Kelly. He sits on both the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. I talked to him just before your time. Senator Kelly, this wasn't a government communication system. No one apparently noticed Jeffrey Goldberg was in the group chat. Secretary Hegseth reportedly wrote at one point, "We're currently clean on OPSEC, operational security." What do you make of this?
Well, it shows just how sloppy all of those individuals on this signal chain were, and I think it's important, Anderson, to note that this was about a operational mission. And it's just incredibly sloppy, but it's also dangerous. If information on a strike against Yemen would leak out ahead of time, let's just say they put somebody else on that chain and the person decided to broadcast it widely at an inopportune time, that could put the pilots that were conducting these strikes at risk. And I think it brings up a larger question about whether are they following the rules that the rest of us live by when we handle classified information. If this incident is any indication, it looks like they do not.
What normally would be the way a group like this might communicate such highly sensitive information?
Well, normally you would go into a skiff and you would do it face to face. And if you couldn't access a skiff, um, there are skiffs around the country. Let's just say when I'm in Tucson, Arizona, I use the Border Patrol skiff that is down the street from my house, several miles away. If you can't do that, there are secure systems to make a secure phone call within the White House, at the Defense Department, anywhere where these individuals normally would be, including in their own homes. When you're the Secretary of Defense or you're the National Security Advisor or the Secretary of State, they'll often set up a secure facility for you in your house so you can have these kind of conversations. It should not be done on Signal. I don't know anybody on the Intelligence Committee here that I serve on that would have anything close to this kind of conversation.
Speaker Johnson downplayed this. He said that they'll tighten up. It doesn't seem like there's much, publicly at least, outrage by your Republican colleagues. Obviously, if this was a Democratic administration, this had been Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or anybody else, it would have been a different tune. Do you expect any kind of hearings here?
Well, Anderson, we have a hearing tomorrow, an open hearing about worldwide threats on the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I can guarantee you that this topic is going to come up tomorrow in an open hearing.
The CIA director is supposed to be there.
CIA director will be there. He was one of the individuals on this text chain. I think the other thing that I noticed is just the discussion that they were having over Signal. It was almost like they were deciding to order a pizza. And it's not the kind of conversation you would expect between the principals when they're deciding to commit troops to combat in a foreign country. So I was pretty shocked by, how not only that this was done on this platform on Signal, but also just shocked about the lack of depth in the discussion before sending our Navy pilots over the beach to drop bombs where there is a significant threat.
President Trump reposted online tonight a comment from Elon Musk joking about this and downplaying the reach of the Atlantic, essentially saying, no one reads the Atlantic. Do you think they are actually have no concern about this, or is this just like a public face of poo-pooing this?
I would expect that they're not having a great day in the White House this afternoon. This is a big deal. This is a breach of the law. It's also national security. It has compromised these individuals and these platforms who had access to their communication devices, their phones, that they obviously have Signal on. Where were those phones over these days? Who can get into the rooms where they keep these devices and possibly see this stuff? There should be some form of an investigation here.
Senator Markelli, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joining me now, CNN senior political commentator, former senior advisor to President Obama, David Axelrod, and CNN Global Affairs analyst, Brett McGurk, who served under 4 presidents, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, and most recently the White House Middle East and North Africa coordinator at the National Security Council during the Biden administration. David, what do you make of how the White House, the Pentagon, are handling this tonight, particularly Secretary Hegseth, who's now attacking Jeffrey Goldberg's credibility and denying any war plans were discussed?
Yeah, well, this is a well-worn pattern now in this operation, which is to deny. But look, Senator Kelly spoke to a couple of serious things. Anybody who served in the White House at a senior level, anybody who served as Brett has served, understands the sensitivity of this kind of information. The fact that they said, well, the operation went forward and there was no damage done, doesn't mean that the next time there won't be damage done, and there should be great concern about that. The fact that this was carried out on Signal is mind-boggling, I think, to most of us who've been around this. But there are a couple of other issues, Anderson. The Secretary of Defense was apparently circulating, despite what he says, war plans on Signal. And it goes back to how he became Secretary of Defense. The way that you became The thing that Donald Trump searched for in his appointees were first, absolute loyalty to Donald Trump, and secondly, how you perform on TV. So that's how you end up with a guy who was a weekend host on Fox and Friends as the Secretary of Defense. Anybody at a senior level that I know in any administration, Republican or Democrat, would have known this is not right. This is not how I'm going to communicate this information. Secondly, thank God Jeffrey Goldberg was on this Zoom. And it just goes to why we need good, aggressive reporting so we know what's going on, because there were troops that were jeopardized by this recklessness. And we wouldn't have known it if Jeff Goldberg hadn't accidentally been on the call. And then finally, where is accountability for this? The fact that the Congress will be muted apparently because Republican congressmen and senators are afraid of challenging the White House on this, that is really alarming. And so from a public interest standpoint, there are a lot of questions here.
Yeah, so I just want to point out it was a Signal chat, not a Zoom. Brett, as a former National Security Council official, how far outside the official process is arranging communications like this on a commercial app on Signal?
Well, Anderson, I've helped coordinate strikes against the Houthis. I helped coordinate military operations. And on the one hand, I have to say that the operation against the Houthis is extraordinarily complex.
And it's ongoing, I should point out.
As a military and intelligence matter. And frankly, the campaign that they are executing now was actually developed in the last administration. It's something we handed over. They're executing on it. I think CENTCOM is carrying out this campaign, from everything I can tell, with extraordinary professionalism and skill. And this is now just a massive distraction. Look, I don't know exactly what happened here, but there's no excuse whatsoever to have the timing and the targets of a military operation 2 hours before the operation commences on an unclassified system. That's just completely almost unheard of.
Would you, Brett, would you have to go into a skiff for this? Is this something which could be done through other electronic means?
Yeah, as a senior national security official, you have the benefit of, you can call the situation room and say, I need the following 5 people on a secure system or a secure line in 10 minutes, and they'll do it. Within the hours before a military operation commencing, you're usually in your office, which is a skiff, a secured, compartmented facility. You have multiple systems on your desk to communicate. You're usually getting reports in from CENTCOM and the combatant commands in real time, and you're communicating on a secure system. And then ultimately, once the operation has commenced and at the right time, you would have a press rollout, and it would become, some of the aspects would become unclassified. But before the operation commences, that is kind of like the most sensitive time in which you are extremely careful with information flow. That's just kind of the bread and butter of these types of operations. I want to say, our troops right now, probably tonight, are operating over Yemen. It is